I don't think I ever really believed everything.
And I realized that quite a few of the things didn't hold water.
The actual religions were man-made from wherever.
God? Who's God? What's God?
I think skepticism really is the first step.
Scientific zest and zeal for the real world.
That was it. I was an atheist from then on.
My personal opinion is that you don't get to pick what you believe, or maybe what.
Hi, I'm Red.
And I'm Susan. Today we're interviewing our friend Greg. To start at the beginning, where were you born and raised?
Well, my dad was an officer in the Air Force, and I was born just outside of Sacramento, California. And we had the usual many moves during the course of my early life. So various stations in California, and spent most of my grade school years outside of Spokane, Washington, and then finished up high school on the island of Guam.
Oh, that's interesting. Was your family religious or atheists, or they didn't care one way or the other?
My mother was a preacher's daughter.
Oh.
And he died when she was quite young, but nevertheless she was brought up in a very religious household, and ours pretty much mirrored that. She played the organ for the choir in the Sunday services and the base chapels at the various stations where we were, and we had a pretty religious household.
And did you serve on the altar, or as an acolyte or an altar boy?
I did not. We were Protestants, so we didn't do a whole lot of that. Mm-hmm. I remember that one time I was given the task of walking down the center aisle of the church with a wick that was burning, and I was supposed to light some candles. And I remember that it seemed quite complex to me, because I had to walk down and gradually keep feeding a little more wick, mm-hmm. so that the flame wouldn't snuff out, but also not too much wick, because otherwise it would just sort of be swaying in the breeze. So that was about it.
Your parents, especially your mother, did they have any influence as far as you being involved in church and religion and believing and such?
Oh, emphatically. We were brought up as children, literally before my memory, mm-hmm. brought up to say our prayers and to sing songs, and we went to church every week, Sunday school or church services themselves. Mm-hmm. We went to youth group every week. We certainly didn't have the full immersion kind of experience that some people do, but we were a pretty religious and pretty observant household.
Would you say that it was sort of a common practice among the neighborhood, the community, and your relatives?
Certainly among our relatives. One of my aunts, one of my mother's sisters, had married a minister herself. Mm-hmm. And there was really an atmosphere of religion throughout the family. And the same thing in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Back then, during the Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson 50s, years, there wasn't even really an imagination of there being anything other than believing in God.
So when you were young, you really believed in all the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I said my evening prayers by myself without having to be told. Every night I would pray before I went to sleep.
So when did you...
become an atheist? At what age?
Or get on the road to atheism? Yes. Or what caused doubts?
When did you start? When did you have doubts in your mind?
Well, I think as a kid you have doubts almost all the time, mm-hmm. even from a very young age, but you just tend to put them aside, particularly when your whole surrounding culture is one that supports God belief. I think in my case, it was probably my sophomore and junior years of high school, mm-hmm. so ages 14 and 15. And and this sounds so funny to me now, I was thinking about World War II, and I was wondering, geez, why didn't God shorten that business up a little bit? And then I realized, well, no, the people on the other side thought that God was on their side too. So they thought that they were God's chosen. We thought that we were. And I realized that the only thing that would be fair would be for God to stay out of it and let all of us fight it out, as is what happened. And I sort of went from there, and this is so funny. I just said, there couldn't be a God if it weren't a fairer one. And so I was thinking, well, you can't work miracles and be fair. People have to be able to rely on the laws of physics staying the same. People have to be able to rely on that. So I said, okay, a fair God would not create any miracles.
So you're more or less basic on logic, not necessarily on science. Which came first to you?
Oh, certainly the logic. Remember, I was, for some years, and this was a gradual process, not any kind of a road to Damascus awakening. I thought about that, and after some time of having almost this deist's position of a God that perhaps had created the universe but then didn't mess with it after that, left us to our own devices, I sort of got to the point of saying, well, either I could think that the universe is just here, this incredibly complex universe, or I could think that a God that created the universe and would have had to be more complex was just there. And I realized the difference was that the universe was the slightly less complex proposition, and also that I encountered the universe every instant of my existence, and I didn't seem to encounter this God ever. So I thought, why not keep it simple? I'd heard about this guy Occam, and I thought, fewer assumptions. Let's go with Occam's razor, and I went from there. And then, again, this was a gradual process, nothing sudden, but certainly by the time I was 17 and headed into my sophomore year of college, I just said, I just don't believe in that stuff anymore.
All right, now that brings us to something that's very important, and that is when you convinced yourself that that is so, how did you get over that hump when you were out of the closet? And was it a problem? Were you ostracized? Tell us a little bit more about that.
I can't say that I was ostracized. Bear in mind that this really sort of, the situation of my not believing anymore really came into full flower, I suppose, about the time that I went to college. And college was 1,000 miles or more away from home.
Okay.
And I just didn't get back home very much. And although occasionally I would make a smart remark on the few visits that I did make home, mostly I just kept things quiet. And my mother, in fact, was ill for many years with a particular kind of wasting disease. And I think she got some comfort from her religion. And I simply couldn't be bothered to try to make her life more painful at that point. What I find a little interesting is realizing that right at the end of her life, she seemed to have lost her own faith, and apparently had decided that after 25 years of pain and so forth, that if a God hadn't been there to help her, there probably wasn't one.
Right.
And what about neighbors, friends, relatives, others? Did you ever have any problem with that?
I can't say that I had a problem with any neighbors or relatives particularly, again, because I was far away from most of my relatives, and because going to a school in upstate New York, I encountered quite a few other people who had limited amounts of belief in gods. Okay. So I think I just sort of gravitated to that kind of person.
And your father, was he still alive? Or?
My father was still alive. And I just don't think that the topic came up very much.
What about when you gradually getting older, getting a job? Did you ever have any problems on the job, or did you ever mention this, or was it ever brought up at all?
Well, it's funny that you ask that, Rad. I have had several careers during the course of my life, but my primary one, at least so far, was as a coach of track and field and cross-country running at the college level. which I did for more than a quarter century. And very early on, I was told that there were some topics that you needed to stay away from: race, religion, politics, sex, drugs, and if you were over 30, rock and roll. Those were things that your students didn't want to hear about from you and shouldn't have had to hear.
So whatever colleges you were coaching at, there wasn't any of these, prayers before the game and things like that.
Only once did one of my athletes come to me before a championship meet, actually the dinner before a championship meet, and ask me whether I would lead them in prayer. And I just said, I'm sorry, I don't do that. And he was fine with it. And otherwise, I had sense enough, I think, to just try to stay away from that.
When you say I don't do that, I think that's a great way to do it, because that could mean that the college doesn't support that, or it could mean that you personally have a feeling that that you just don't believe in it. Just saying I don't do that leaves you right out of it. I think that's a smart thing to say.
And it could mean that I was a follower of Jesus and would only do my praying in my closet.
That's right.
And I can't quite remember whether one Saturday morning I happened to stroll by Columbus Circle and saw the table there, or whether it was when I went to the great God Google and looked for New York City Atheists and found an organization called New York City Atheists. And one of the things on there on the website was this information about tabling at Columbus Circle on Saturday middays.
So you really learned about us from tabling.
Tabling and or the internet, I can't remember, to be honest, which.
Indeed.
And I'm reminded, even dealing with my partners at the table, that the only thing that really unites us as atheists, unites us all, none of us believes in any God or gods. And otherwise, we have different opinions on a lot of things. My personal opinion is that you don't get to pick what you believe, or maybe what you find believable. So if somebody comes to the table and he or she is a believer, I can't be upset with that. I just try to help people see that it's not because of orneriness or just trying to be a nonconformist or a jerk that I don't believe myself, but because that's something that I can't believe. And I try typically to be actually fairly welcoming, because it's interesting, I think, to meet different kinds of people there.
They
Some
don't want to
people are
stick
sort
around.
of hit and run.
Yes.
Some people have something that they want to say, and they'll come by one end of the table, and they'll say it in passing, and then they're on their way by. A few people, I think, honestly try to change our ways. I think in most cases that they sincerely want the best for us. But my experience has been that not too many people come by that do that. If anything, we seem to get as many non-believers or doubters, I guess, stopping by.
And being at Columbus Circle, a lot of them are from other countries, and sort of
that's
wondering why we even need to,
To do this,
get
because
atheists to
those
join.
other countries are mostly atheists to begin with. A good 80 or 90% of them are like from Europe, and especially Scandinavian countries.
Canada. Or,
Right.
Yeah. and
However, we do get some people, and I'm sure you know this, that are sincerely interested in knowing why and what's going on, or they're not too sure, agnostic. And for that reason, they come in and we ask them, please sit down and have a seat. And we talk to them and we work out things and try to be reasonable, listen to their point of view, and find out where there are gaps as far as not acknowledging, or at least not knowing, and they want to have it filled. And that's what we come in there and do our best.
I think so. And I know that we've had some very pleasant conversations. And
those other ones.
and a few other ones.
Challenging.
There we go.
we
Just enough of the challenging ones to make us appreciate the majority of them that much more.
That's right. And it's very interesting. It's a lot of fun, and you get together to meet your fellow atheists, and that's a good thing.
I certainly feel happier in general than I did when I was a child who believed in God, because
Nobody's watching you.
nobody's watching me, and I don't have this overwhelming feeling of messing up all the time. I mess up some of the time, and other times I get things right. Whereas when I was a believer, I certainly felt that I was a sinner 100% of my existence, and that was not as pleasant
We're
an
born into
experience.
sin, supposedly.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm wondering whether you're going to go that way or
Yeah.
go that way.
Well, I had a pretty good clue when I was a kid. Where I
Now,
was
if I recall
kinda
correctly,
petty.
you're married. Is your wife an atheist or?
My wife is a non-believer.
Non-believer.
She's, which is my synonym for atheist, but she was brought up in a household of non-believers, and it was simply never
A problem for
a problem of any kind.
Do you have any children?
I have 2 daughters.
And how do you raise them in this? Do you leave it open for them to figure this out on their own first, or do you guide them, or what?
Well, we did a couple of things that I think worked well when the kids were younger. We sometimes, usually at their request, would take them to visit different kinds of religious services. And because they were interested, they had some friends and acquaintances who went to these services on Saturdays and Sundays. And so we found places where visitors would be welcome, and we would occasionally take them there.
parenting done right.
And did you bring them to museums and like Museum of Natural History or the Hayden Planetarium for them to get a different point of view, or see some other things that they could register in their mind on their own?
Well, as you might guess, any children of mine would be extraordinarily intelligent. And so they had very questioning minds and were very interested in finding out things about nature and so forth. So we
that's
had
that affair
many,
in balance.
many trips to the Natural History Museum. And they were always very interested in really just about everything.
So they have followed in your footsteps in that respect, or?
It's funny, my younger daughter, and I had never schooled her in this. My younger daughter, I remember, wrote an essay when she was perhaps 8 or 9 years old that she said, well, I feel kind of different from some of the other kids because I'm an atheist. Which is a word that I had never applied to her, and neither had her mother.
So your jaw dropped then.
she simply realized that she didn't believe in any gods, and she knew that meant a person was an atheist.
How old are your children now?
Golly, you're going to ask me
They're
to do some
adults.
subtraction.
They're adults. They're adults.
They're adults.
They're
They're
married?
20 plus. They're 20 plus.
Have they ever been to any of the meetings that we have, or any of our Sunday brunches?
They have not. Currently, one of them is in Japan, as she has been for more than the last year, and the other lives in Chicago.
Yeah, there are these. There are people that you have to deal with every day, and sometimes I'm sure you see on TV where they say, "Well, the newscasters, well, we're going to pray for that, and hopefully that'll take care of it." And I'm sure every atheist who is watching is saying, "Oh no, how could you say that? How could you even think that way?" And they're not neutral. It's like it has to be. There has to be a superior being that's watching every moment and everything we're doing.
Well, that famous
And
case after the tornado.
Yes.
Yes, where he asked her, are you thanking God, you survived? And she says, I'm an atheist.
That's right.
Yes.
That was a shock.
If she had been a believer, she might have stayed in the bathtub that she initially hit herself and her child in.
That's right.
But she didn't have that faith, and so she thought, let's get out of this bathtub, let's get out of this house, and let's get out of the town, which is what she did. Her house was flattened. She and the child were fine.
Do you know, it seems that a lot of people start to do reasoning and what's called critical thinking or deductive reasoning through astronomy. You've mentioned that. I've been that, and I think a lot of other people, I think you too.
Oh, good grief,
Mostly
yes.
because we look at the vastness of things and the magnitude astronomically, as we say, as far as possible planets, possible life out there and whatnot. Can we be the only ones? You went through that too.
Well, I've certainly, even as a young child, I was very interested in stars and the universe and so forth. And of course, it was only some years later that I realized that people would always talk about how the universe was fine-tuned for life. I realized that I'm going to run out of breath before I run out of nines. 99.99999999999% of the universe is absolutely inimical to life. So how on earth could we think that was ever fine-tuned?
Absolutely true. It is dangerous, a big hazard out there for many, many reasons. And radiation and supernovas and everything that you can think of could happen. And we're fortunate, really fortunate. But that means there are also other areas that are also fortunate too. We're not just everything is made for us, and you got to keep it at that type of thought.
Strangely enough, hardly anyone ever does.
You can tell me you don't sneeze.
I sneeze, but typically, for whatever reason, not in public. Very rarely in public.
Okay, say you're at a Thanksgiving, some dinner party with the family, whatever it is, and someone stands up and says, "Let's do a little prayer." Put our
Holds hands,
together.
right.
Holds hands. How would you handle something like that? Or have you?
I guess the way I handle that is by typically not being in that kind of a situation. Most of my holiday meals are with my family or with my in-laws, so there's very little of that impulse in any case. I was actually it's funny that you asked this. I was actually in a difficult situation over the weekend. I was at a track and field meet as a spectator, and unfortunately, one of the officials was inattentive and was struck by a 35-pound weight, which is one of the events of indoor track and field. And I'm sorry to say that he was killed. And I was rather shaken up. And somebody came up to me and said, I can see that you're really bothered, and I want you to know we're praying for you. And I accepted that in the sentiment with which it was given. And usually when people do something like that for me, I'll simply say, I appreciate the sentiment. And I let it go from there. On the other hand, at work, I've gotten people pretty much at the point now, or at least some of my coworkers, where if somebody sneezes, they say, "Salud."
Or Gesundheit.
Yeah, but salud is shorter and sounds a little neater. And so they're wishing somebody health. And one or two of my coworkers in particular, who themselves are not believers but have just been saying God bless you out of habit, have said, yeah, let's go with salud from here on in. So that's one small way, I guess, that we get to change things.
I'm a bit like your co-workers. I have to work on the salud part, but I'm doing my best.
Gesundheit works, but I don't know, it somehow seems more aggressive.
Well,
Gesundheit.
It's German.
It's just German.
Get well and stay well. Whereas
That's right.
with health in Spanish, I'm just wishing them well.
Right.
One thing that we do, and at least I do, I've mentioned that in a couple of times, I'll say it again here, is that I was at a Thanksgiving dinner, and there were people that I knew and some that I didn't know, and they all of a sudden said, let's hold hands and pray for Thanksgiving, and thank God this, and thank God that, and thank God this. And I said, well, I let them finish. I didn't say anything. And then I said, I'd like to also give thanks. And they said, fine. I said, we could hold hands, so we don't, but we'll continue. And I said, I want to thank goodness for those, I want to thank those people, farmers who put down the seeds in the ground for it to grow into nice vegetables and whatnot, and taking care of those animals that we would eventually have at our dinner site. And I also want to thank those who had to pick up all those fruits and vegetables that they didn't have machinery to do that. And I want to thank all those who came over, who brought the vegetables to the supermarkets, and the truckers who had to do that. And I want to thank those supermarket people who set up the display, and also I want to thank the cooks who cooked the food, and for those here who cooked the food. So that's where my thanks goes. And that's it. I left it like that, and everybody looked.
A nice secular thanks.
Right, exactly. They looked, they said, oh, and then they realized, oh, you're, and that was that. But it works. It gets you out of that uncomfortable situation where you have to say, well, I don't really believe, and you don't want to say that there because you'll ruin the atmosphere for everybody else. But this works that way, and the people are happy, and it's everybody's comfortable.
Outstanding.
Okay.
Great option.
Oh, I want to thank you very much for letting us pry into your history and your thoughts and beliefs and how you were able to handle that. It certainly is appreciated, and we thank you very much for it.
My pleasure.
Okay,
Susan?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go.
Oh, I just remember you telling me at tabling that you had a heart attack a while back.
Yes, at the beginning of last year, actually, I had a heart attack, and A small one. Apparently, that's actually the medical term. Little heart attack is the kind that I had, otherwise known as an N-STEMI. And the doctors were all quite surprised because all of my numbers seemed to indicate that I had nothing to fear, but every now and then things work out that way. And I suppose in part if you had two grandfathers who were both dead of heart attacks before they were 60.
Oh, that's
And
so therefore, because I know you're a good athlete, you do a lot of running and jogging. Whatnot.
well, I can't run anymore, but
you used to.
I did.
You're
I
a
used to be
walker,
a
I know
runner,
that.
and I walked 40 to 50 miles a week.
Right, so the inheritance was the factor then.
Beyond a doubt, I did a very poor job of picking grandfathers, and that made it tough for me.
You had to go to speed of light to go back,
That fast I can't walk.
to go back in time, right?
And I was, to be honest, when I was in the hospital for that day and a half or so, getting
just that?
getting a stent put into the artery and opening it up again,
You felt the difference.
I was really too busy at the time to be thinking about religion or irreligion. But when I got out of there and got home, I realized, geez, I was really potentially looking death right in the face. And the thought of a God just had never occurred to me. And I find that encouraging because, again, I've talked about this sort of process that I followed.
Right.
Up until even a few years ago, I was more or less against that idea of a God. In the last few years, I've sort of developed this sense of, oh, well, that's something I don't believe in. A much calmer, not sort of confrontational thing, but, I don't believe in that. Yeah. Just as I don't believe in the spirit of the river that somebody in another country might believe in. I don't believe in this particular spirit that some of the people in this country believe in.
Or unicorns, or...
I don't believe in unicorns yet, although my mind is open. If I'm ever given evidence for one, I'll go with it.
You don't have a guilt feeling. You don't have a feeling of that it was that close, and there may be something there that's saving you. You just wipe that out.
One of the few pleasures in the week or two while I was recovering were just the realization that, yes, I had looked at the possibility of dying, and I was fine with it. I feel very fortunate. I've been lucky in many things my whole life, and I've had a fortunate life. I've gotten some things accomplished that I'm actually fairly proud of. I don't expect to live forever. And I'm glad that the time that I am living, I'm dealing with reality and not spending my time wishing and hoping.
Okay.
Well, thank you.